the oar slips silently into the dark North Sea waters as 30 men breathe in unison, their bodies swaying to the rhythm of the waves. Night has fallen, and after 14 hours of rowing, muscles burn with exhaustion. Yet there are no beds awaiting these seafarers, only wooden planks, the constant pitch and roll of the vessel, and the spray of icy water. For the Norse mariners who revolutionised naval warfare and exploration during the Viking Age, roughly 793 to 1066 CE, the longship was not merely a vessel, it was home, sometimes for weeks or months at a time. How did these legendary warriors manage to maintain their ferocious reputation and navigate treacherous waters while contending with one of humanity's most basic needs, sleep? The question of how Vikings slept aboard their iconic longships reveals far more than mere sleeping arrangements. It opens a window into the extraordinary resilience, ingenious adaptability, and pragmatic culture that enabled these Scandinavian seafarers to dominate maritime Europe for centuries. Their ability to rest effectively while at sea became one of their greatest tactical advantages, allowing them to strike with legendary speed, travel unprecedented distances, and endure conditions that would break lesser crews. Blood-red sails appear on the horizon at dawn, a sight that sent shivers through coastal communities across Europe. The distinctive silhouette of the Viking longship represented the perfect marriage of form and function, a vessel so revolutionary that its basic design principles would influence shipbuilding for centuries to come. The longship's genius lay in its versatility. With a shallow draft of merely 50 centimetres, 20 inches, these vessels could navigate both deep ocean waters and shallow rivers. They could be propelled by either sail or oars, allowing Vikings to maintain momentum regardless of wind conditions. Most critically for our examination of Viking sleep patterns, longships were relatively narrow, typically between 2.5 and 5 metres wide, 8 to 16 feet. With limited deck space for a crew that could number anywhere from 25 to a Rubdamannadrigl. Archaeological finds like the Gokstad ship, discovered in Norway in 1880, and the Oseberg ship, unearthed in 1904, have provided invaluable insights into longship construction. These vessels featured an open design with minimal internal compartments, meaning that nearly all activities, including sleeping, occurred in full view of the entire crew in a shared, open space. The longship was not designed with comfort in mind, explains maritime archaeologist Ole Krumlin Pedersen. It was built for speed, manoeuvrability, and the ability to carry warriors and their equipment. Sleeping accommodations were at best an afterthought. This presents our first paradox. How did Vikings maintain their legendary effectiveness as warriors and explorers while sleeping on vessels that offered virtually no dedicated sleeping quarters? The answer lies in a combination of practical design adaptations, cultural conditioning, and remarkable physical resilience. Imagine yourself aboard a Viking longship as dusk approaches. The day's rowing has left your shoulders aching, your hands blistered despite their calluses. The ship's commander gives the order to make ready for night. What happens next? Unlike modern naval vessels with designated berths or hammocks, Vikings slept directly on the deck planking of their ships. Archaeological evidence from preserved longships shows that the deck consisted of removable wooden planks laid across the ship's frame. These planks, while not designed specifically as beds, served as the primary sleeping surface for the crew. The most common sleeping arrangement involved Vikings simply finding space along the central corridor of the ship, lying parallel to the keel line. Men would position themselves between the rowing benches, using their sea chests, wooden boxes containing personal belongings, as makeshift pillows or backrests. These chests, found in several archaeological sites, were typically about 50 centimetres long, 20 inches, and contained spare clothing, personal weapons, and small valuables. The sleep position was largely dictated by the ship's architecture, notes Viking historian Judith Jesch. With oar ports along both sides and limited width, men had little choice but to sleep aligned with the ship's length, packed closely together like sardines. This proximity served a practical purpose beyond simply maximising space. The shared body heat of dozens of men became crucial for survival during cold northern nights. Historical accounts from sagas suggest that Vikings sometimes slept in shifts, with half the crew maintaining watch while others rested, though during extended journeys in safe waters. It's likely most of the crew slept simultaneously. What's particularly striking is the absence of dedicated sleeping materials in archaeological findings from longships. While wealthy Vikings enjoyed beds stuffed with feathers or straw in their homes, shipboard life was remarkably Spartan. The evidence suggests most men simply used their cloaks as blankets, and perhaps animal skins or wool padding as minimal cushioning against the hard deck. The Bayeux Tapestry, though depicting Norman rather than Viking ships, shows seafarers sleeping directly on deck, confirming the simplicity of maritime sleeping arrangements during this era. This minimalist approach to sleep accommodations reflected both practical necessity and the Viking cultural ethos that prized hardiness and resilience over comfort. A sudden squall erupts over the North Atlantic. Rain lashes down in horizontal sheets while waves crash over the gunwales. How did Vikings manage to sleep through such conditions without modern foul-weather gear or enclosed cabins? The question of weather protection represents one of the most challenging aspects of Viking maritime sleep. Longships were primarily open vessels, with minimal built-in shelter from the elements. Archaeological evidence and saga accounts suggest several adaptations that helped Vikings cope with harsh conditions. Tents and awnings. Several Viking sagas mention the use of ship tents, hoodfat, temporary coverings erected over portions of the vessel during overnight stops or particularly foul weather. Archaeological finds from the Gokstad ship included wooden tent poles and the remains of woolen cloth that likely formed part of such a covering. These tents would have provided some protection from rain and spray, though they were likely impractical during heavy storms or while the ship was in motion. Waterproof cloaks. Viking clothing was remarkably well suited to maritime conditions. Woolen cloaks treated with animal fats became naturally water resistant, creating an early form of waterproof garment. Sagas describe Vikings wrapping themselves in these cloaks, pulling them over their heads to create a protective cocoon against rain and spray. Strategic positioning. The most experienced sailors likely claimed sleeping positions that offered the best protection from the elements. Archaeological examination of longship design suggests that areas near the stern and beneath the raised platforms at bow and stern provided slightly better shelter from spray and wind. Wooden shields. When not in combat, the warriors' shields could serve a secondary purpose as improvised weather protection. The Gokstad ship featured shield racks along the gunwales where wooden shields would be displayed while sailing. At night, these shields could be repositioned to create windbreaks or rudimentary shelter. The reality, however, is that Vikings often simply endured the elements. Their cultural ethos celebrated hardiness and resilience in the face of physical discomfort. The sagas frequently mention Vikings continuing to row and sail through terrible conditions, suggesting that the ability to function and sleep, despite environmental challenges, was considered an essential quality of a true Norse seafarer. Ibn Fadlan, an Arab diplomat who encountered Vikings, whom he called Rus, on the Volga River in the 10th century, noted their remarkable tolerance for harsh conditions. I have never seen more perfect physical specimens, tall as date palms, blonde and ruddy. Each man has an axe, a sword and a knife, and keeps each by him at all times. They are the filthiest of God's creatures. They do not wash after polluting themselves, or after they have eaten. They are like wild asses. While Ibn Fadlan's account contains obvious cultural bias, his observation of Viking hardiness aligns with archaeological and historical evidence, suggesting that these seafarers possessed extraordinary physical resilience, a quality that would have been essential for sleeping effectively in the challenging conditions of open-sea voyaging. The misconception that Vikings maintained a constant, frenzied pace of activity, rowing continuously until exhaustion, fails to account for the realities of extended maritime voyages. Archaeological evidence and saga accounts suggest a more sophisticated approach to managing energy and sleep while at sea. The Viking sleep cycle appears to have been organised around a watch system similar to those used by later seafaring cultures. The day was divided into 8 3-hour periods called eikt in Old Norse. During active sailing or rowing, the crew likely operated in shifts, with some men resting while others worked. This rotation allowed for continuous operation of the vessel while ensuring adequate rest for all crew members. The watch system was essential for long-distance voyaging, explains maritime historian Marcus Faulkner. Without it, crews would have quickly become exhausted and ineffective. The Vikings' ability to maintain alertness over extended periods gave them a significant tactical advantage. The saga of the Greenlanders describes how crews divided responsibilities during the challenging transatlantic voyages to Vinland, North America. They took turns at the steering oar and at rest. This simple statement reveals a sophisticated understanding of human endurance and the necessity of managing sleep debt during the extended voyages. Viking sleep patterns likely differed significantly from our modern expectation of a single consolidated nighttime sleep period. Historical evidence suggests that pre-industrial peoples often practiced biphasic, or segmented sleep, sleeping in 2 distinct periods with a period of wakefulness between. This pattern may have been particularly well suited to maritime life, allowing crews to adapt their rest periods to changing conditions and requirements. The natural rhythm of daylight would have strongly influenced Viking sleep patterns, particularly during voyages in the far north, where summer days could stretch to nearly 24 hours, and winter nights could be equally long. Saga accounts suggest that Vikings took advantage of these conditions, sometimes rowing continuously during the nightless summer months to cover maximum distance. During winter voyages, which were generally avoided but sometimes necessary, the extended darkness presented different challenges. Archaeological evidence suggests increased use of oil lamps and fires contained in clay pots during this season, providing minimal illumination for essential activities and perhaps psychological comfort in the darkness. The Viking approach to sleep at sea reveals a pragmatic flexibility that prioritised the needs of the voyage over rigid adherence to fixed schedules, a characteristic that would have enhanced their effectiveness as both raiders and explorers. The crack of thunder overhead, the constant motion of the ship, the press of bodies in close quarters, the uncertainty of what morning might bring. How did Vikings maintain psychological equilibrium while sleeping in such challenging conditions? Understanding the psychological dimensions of Viking maritime sleep requires examining both their cultural conditioning and the neurological adaptations that would have developed through repeated exposure to shipboard conditions. From childhood, Norse males were raised in a culture that celebrated stoicism and physical hardiness. Enduring discomfort without complaint was considered an essential quality of manhood. Young boys would have begun participating in shorter coastal voyages from an early age, gradually acclimating to the challenges of sleeping aboard ships. The Viking approach to hardship was fundamentally different from our modern perspective, notes psychologist and maritime historian Elena Krumova. What we might consider intolerable conditions were simply accepted as the normal state of affairs. This psychological framing would have significantly reduced the stress associated with the shipboard discomfort. This cultural conditioning was reinforced by neurological adaptation. The human brain demonstrates remarkable plasticity in adjusting to sleep environments. Modern studies of maritime professionals show that experienced sailors develop the ability to maintain sleep quality despite motion, noise, and unusual schedules, a phenomenon that would have been equally applicable to Viking seafarers. The vestibular system, which controls balance and spatial orientation, gradually adapts to the constant motion of a ship. Vikings who spent significant portions of their lives at sea would have developed what modern sailors call sea legs, the ability to maintain balance and function effectively despite the ship's movement. This adaptation extends to sleep, allowing experienced seafarers to remain in deeper sleep states despite motion that would immediately wake a landlubber. Archaeological evidence suggests Vikings employed several psychological techniques to enhance sleep quality. Communal storytelling. Saga accounts frequently mention the telling of stories and recitation of poetry during evening hours aboard ship. Beyond entertainment, these activities serve to establish a predictable pre-sleep routine and reduce anxiety through social bonding. Alcohol consumption. While drunkenness would have been impractical aboard ship, archaeological evidence indicates that fermented beverages were consumed in moderate quantities during voyages. The mild sedative effect would have facilitated sleep onset in challenging conditions. Religious rituals. Amulets of Thor's hammer and other religious symbols have been found among personal effects on excavated ships. Evening prayers to gods like Thor, who protected travellers, and Njord, god of seafaring, would have provided psychological comfort before sleep. The Viking approach to maritime sleep reveals a sophisticated understanding of human psychology, one that recognised the importance of mental resilience alongside physical endurance for successful seafaring. The sizzle of salted fish cooking over a small clay pot brazier, the pungent aroma of fermented dairy, the crunch of hard bread that has been stored for weeks. Viking maritime diet played a crucial, yet often overlooked role in their sleep patterns at sea. Archaeological analysis of Viking shipboard provisions reveals a diet carefully calibrated to support extended voyaging. Food residues found in cooking vessels and storage containers from excavated ships indicate a protein-rich diet centered around preserved fish, dried meat, and fermented dairy products like skyr, similar to yogurt. This high-protein, moderate-fat diet would have provided sustained energy release, critical for maintaining body temperature during sleep in cold maritime environments. Modern nutritional science confirms that protein consumption before sleep helps maintain stable blood sugar levels throughout the night, preventing the hunger-induced wakefulness that can disrupt sleep cycles. Viking maritime diet was remarkably well suited to their needs, explains nutritional archaeologist Sarah Hoffman. The combination of preserved proteins and fermented foods provided not only sustenance, but compounds that would have aided sleep quality under challenging conditions. Particularly significant was the Vikings' consumption of fermented foods. Fermentation not only preserved food for long voyages, but created beneficial compounds including natural sedatives. Fermented fish and dairy products contain GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, and other compounds that promote relaxation and sleep, essentially providing a natural sleep aid. Archaeological evidence from the Oseberg ship and other vessels indicates that Vikings carried substantial quantities of honey on their voyages. Honey mixed with water, and sometimes fermented into mead, was consumed before sleep. Modern research confirms honey's effectiveness in promoting sleep through its impact on insulin levels and tryptophan uptake in the brain. The Vikings' approach to hydration also influenced their sleep quality. Rather than drinking large quantities of water before sleep, which would necessitate disruptive nighttime urination, evidence suggests they consumed small amounts of higher-calorie liquids like buttermilk or thin ale. These provided both hydration and additional calories to maintain body temperature throughout the night. The timing of meals appears to have been carefully considered as well. Saga accounts and archaeological evidence suggest that the main meal was typically consumed in the late afternoon or early evening, providing sufficient time for initial digestion before sleep, while ensuring sustained energy release throughout the night. This nutritional strategy represents yet another example of Viking pragmatism, using available resources in ways that maximise their effectiveness as maritime warriors and explorers. The image of Vikings sleeping directly on hard wooden planks requires some nuance. While shipboard sleeping arrangements were certainly Spartan compared to modern standards, archaeological evidence suggests Vikings employed several techniques to improve sleep comfort within the constraints of maritime life. Excavations of the Gokstad and Oseberg ships revealed traces of animal skins and woolen textiles that likely served as bedding materials. Sheep and goat skins with the wool or hair still attached would have provided both cushioning and insulation from the cold deck. These natural materials had the additional advantage of remaining somewhat effective, even when damp, a crucial consideration in the inevitably wet environment of an open boat. The use of animal skins as bedding was universal across northern cultures, notes archaeological textile specialist Lisa Bender-Jurgensen. They provided remarkable insulation even in wet conditions. A good reindeer or bearskin can keep a sleeper warm, even on snow or ice. Viking sagas mention the use of hudfat, literally skin containers, bags made of animal hide that contain personal belongings during the day, but could be emptied and used as sleeping pads at night. This dual-purpose approach to bedding materials reflects the premium placed on space efficiency aboard longships. The physical sleeping surface itself, the deck planking, was more sophisticated than might first appear. Analysis of preserved longships shows that deck planks were carefully shaped and fitted, with the upper surface often smoothed to remove splinters and rough edges. On some vessels, archaeological evidence suggests that areas frequently used for sleeping received additional finishing to improve comfort. The rowing benches themselves played an important role in sleep arrangements. While too narrow to serve as beds, they provided critical support for the back or head when sleeping on the deck. Some benches show evidence of slight contouring that would have made them more comfortable as backrests during rest periods. Most intriguing is evidence from several excavated ships of small, raised platforms at the stern of the vessel. These areas, slightly elevated above the main deck, show signs of more extensive wear and contain higher concentrations of personal items. This suggests they may have been preferred sleeping locations, possibly reserved for ship commanders or particularly valued crew members. The Vikings' approach to sleep surfaces reflects their broader philosophical approach to maritime life, accepting fundamental discomfort while making pragmatic adaptations to improve functionality within the constraints of their technology and environment. Sleep aboard a Viking longship was not merely a physical challenge but a social one. Dozens of men confined in an open vessel smaller than a modern bus had to negotiate the intimate details of rest while maintaining the hierarchical structure essential to effective operation. Archaeological and textual evidence suggests that sleeping positions aboard longships were allocated according to a clear social hierarchy. The ship's commander typically claimed the stern position, the area that offered slightly better protection from the elements, and positioned him near the steering oar, the ship's primary control mechanism. This arrangement maintained his authority even during rest periods and allowed him to quickly assume command if conditions changed. The most experienced sailors and higher status warriors would position themselves in the midship section, where the vessel's motion was least pronounced. Lower status crew members, including younger or less experienced men, would be relegated to the bow section, which experienced the most violent motion in rough seas. This spatial organisation of sleep reflected and reinforced the social hierarchy, explains anthropologist Magnus Nilsson. Even in unconsciousness, the Viking crew maintained their social structure, a pattern we see in many traditional maritime cultures. The intimate proximity of sleeping arrangements necessitated strict social codes governing behaviour. Saga accounts mention taboos against certain behaviours that would disturb the sleep of others. The saga of the Vikings, for instance, notes that no man should speak to another after evening prayers during certain voyages, a rule designed to maintain sleep discipline. Archaeological evidence from several longships suggests the use of personal markers to delineate individual sleeping spaces. Small carved wooden pegs found embedded in deck planking may have been used to secure personal bedding or mark individual territories within the communal sleeping area. This social organisation extended to sleep scheduling as well. The watch system described earlier was not merely functional, but reinforced social bonds through shared hardship. By rotating watches, Vikings ensured that different social groups within the crew experienced similar conditions, preventing the formation of resentments that might undermine crew cohesion. Perhaps most significant was the role of communal sleep in building the intense bonds necessary for effective combat operations. Modern military research confirms that shared sleep environments create powerful psychological connections between unit members. For Vikings, whose combat effectiveness depended on tightly coordinated shield walls and synchronized rowing, these sleep-forged bonds would have been militarily advantageous. The social dimension of Viking maritime sleep reveals a sophisticated understanding of group psychology, one that transformed the necessity of proximity into a strategic advantage. Dawn breaks over the English coastline. While local villagers are just beginning to stir from their beds, 60 Viking warriors, who have slept efficiently despite a night at sea, beach their longship and launch a raid at peak effectiveness. Their ability to arrive rested and ready for combat represented one of the Vikings' greatest tactical advantages. Historical accounts of Viking raids frequently mention their ability to appear suddenly and attack with unexpected vigour, a capability directly linked to their mastery of maritime sleep. By maintaining sleep quality during transit, Viking raiders could arrive at their targets without the performance degradation that typically accompanies sleep deprivation. The Vikings' ability to sleep effectively at sea gave them an enormous tactical advantage, explains military historian William Short. While their targets were often exhausted after maintaining night watches against possible raids, the Vikings themselves arrived relatively well rested and at full combat effectiveness. This advantage extended beyond initial raids to sustained campaigns. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records with apparent bewilderment how Viking forces could remain active for extended periods, moving rapidly between targets without apparent fatigue. This endurance stemmed partly from their ability to use maritime transit time for effective recovery. Archaeological evidence suggests Vikings specifically designed certain aspects of their ships with sleep functionality in mind. The Gokstad ship, for example, features subtle differences in deck plank thickness in areas typically used for sleeping, suggesting deliberate reinforcement of these sections to improve rest quality during transit to targets. The tactical importance of sleep is further evidenced by the positioning of sentries during rest periods. Shield bosses, the central metal components of Viking shields, found in specific positions near the bow and stern of excavated longships, suggest designated watchstander positions that provided maximum visibility while minimising disruption to sleeping crew members. Perhaps most telling is the evidence that Vikings sometimes deliberately synchronised their attacks with circadian vulnerabilities in their targets. Historical accounts note a pattern of raids occurring during early morning hours, approximately 4 a.m. to 6 a.m., when target populations would be experiencing their deepest sleep phase and thus be slowest to respond effectively. This tactical leveraging of sleep advantage represents a sophisticated understanding of human performance factors centuries before the formal development of military sleep science. The Vikings' approach to maritime sleep becomes even more impressive when compared to contemporary seafaring cultures. During the same historical period, roughly 800 to 1100 CE, other maritime powers employed fundamentally different approaches to the challenge of shipboard sleep. Byzantine droman warships, for instance, featured enclosed rowing decks with designated sleeping areas for oarsmen, typically slaves who lived permanently aboard the vessels. This approach provided better weather protection, but created serious hygiene issues and required larger, less manoeuvrable vessels. Arab dhows of the period incorporated small cabin structures at the stern where merchants and important passengers could sleep in relative comfort. These accommodations came at the cost of sailing performance, as the cabins created wind resistance and raised the vessel's centre of gravity. Chinese junks of the Tang and Song dynasties featured the most sophisticated sleeping arrangements of the era, with multiple deck levels and dedicated sleeping compartments. These vessels were technologically impressive, but required deeper harbours, and could not match the Vikings' ability to operate effectively in both riverine and open sea environments. What distinguished the Viking approach was its ruthless prioritisation of vessel performance over crew comfort. By accepting Spartan sleeping conditions, Vikings gained unmatched versatility, speed, and tactical surprise capability. Their ships could navigate waters inaccessible to larger vessels, operate effectively with smaller crews, and maintain higher average speeds over extended journeys. The Vikings' willingness to endure discomfort gave them a decisive edge, notes naval historian Richard Woodman. While their contemporaries built increasingly comfortable ships that sacrificed performance, the Vikings maintained their focus on vessels optimised for their primary missions: raiding, trading, and exploration. This performance-first philosophy extended beyond ship design to crew selection and training. While Byzantine and Arab fleets increasingly relied on specialised professional sailors, Viking crews consisted primarily of warrior sailors who could function effectively in both maritime and land combat roles. This versatility required individuals capable of maintaining combat readiness despite suboptimal sleep conditions, a standard that shaped Viking culture and training practices. The Vikings' approach to maritime sleep represents an early example of what modern military planners would call asymmetric advantage, accepting hardship in one domain to gain decisive superiority in others. The challenges of sleeping during brief coastal raids pale in comparison to those faced during the Vikings' most ambitious maritime undertakings, the long-distance voyages to Iceland, Greenland, and eventually North America. These journeys, lasting weeks or even months, required sophisticated sleep management strategies beyond those employed during shorter expeditions. Archaeological evidence from Viking settlements in Iceland and Greenland provides insights into how these extended voyages were conducted. Analysis of the Greenland Viking diet through bone isotope studies reveals increased consumption of marine mammals and fish oil during the settlement period, nutrients that would have aided thermoregulation during sleep in the challenging conditions of North Atlantic crossings. The sagas describing these voyages mention specific sleep-related adaptations. The saga of the Greenlanders notes that during the voyage to Vinland, North America, the crew divided themselves into watches for sleeping and keeping guard over the ship. This suggests a more formalised watch rotation system for these extended journeys than was typical for shorter coastal voyages. Archaeological evidence from several Viking ships indicates the use of more substantial shipboard shelters during long voyages. The Gokstad ship contained wooden tent poles and textile fragments, suggesting a more permanent covering than would be practical for short journeys. These shelters would have created protected sleeping spaces, essential for maintaining crew functionality during weeks at sea. The psychological dimension of sleep during these voyages deserves particular attention. Modern research on extended maritime operations indicates that sleep quality typically deteriorates over time as psychological stresses accumulate. The Vikings appear to have employed several techniques to counter this effect. Landfall breaks. Saga accounts mention periodic stops at islands or coastal points during long voyages, allowing crews to sleep on land for one or more nights. These breaks would have provided psychological relief and an opportunity for deeper recovery sleep. Progressive acclimation. Evidence suggests that Vikings undertook long voyages in stages, with stops at established settlements, like the Orkneys or Faroe Islands, before attempting the longest open water passages. This approach allowed for gradual adaptation to maritime sleeping conditions. Ritualised sleep practices. Archaeological findings include small carved items identified as personal sleep talismans, objects believed to promote restful sleep. These items, often depicting protective gods like Thor, suggest ritualised sleep practices that would have provided psychological comfort during stressful voyages. Perhaps most remarkable is evidence that Vikings maintained effective sleep discipline even during crisis conditions. The Saga of Eric. The Red describes how, during a storm that threatened to sink their ship, the crew maintained watch rotations rather than having everyone attempt to address the emergency simultaneously, a sophisticated approach that ensured some crew members remained rested enough to function effectively if the crisis extended over multiple days. This strategic approach to sleep management during extended voyages helps explain how Vikings successfully completed maritime journeys that would remain unmatched in the North Atlantic until the age of steam power nearly a millennium later. To fully understand Viking maritime sleep practices, we must place them within the broader context of Norse attitudes towards sleep, rest, and endurance. Archaeological evidence from Viking settlements reveals that even on land, Norse sleep patterns differed significantly from our modern expectations. Excavations of Viking longhouses show that entire families typically slept in a single room, often on raised platforms along the walls with a central hearth providing heat. Privacy, as we understand it today, was largely absent from Viking sleep environments. This cultural comfort with communal sleep would have prepared Norse seafarers for the intimate proximity of shipboard sleeping arrangements. Norse mythology reflects a culture that viewed sleep as a vulnerable but necessary state. The god Odin was famous for requiring minimal sleep, while his son Thor was depicted as a heavy sleeper, suggesting a recognition of natural variation in sleep needs. The mythological wolf Fenrir was prophesied to devour the sun at Ragnarok, the Norse apocalypse, bringing eternal night, a reflection of the existential importance of the light-dark cycle to Norse sleep patterns. Particularly relevant to maritime sleep practices are the numerous references in Norse literature to the ability to sleep under adverse conditions as a mark of courage and self-mastery. The Havamal, a collection of Old Norse poems from the Poetic Edda, contains several verses praising the ability to maintain vigilance when necessary, but also to rest effectively when possible. The unwise man is awake all night, worrying over everything. When morning comes, he is weary in mind, and all is a burden as before. This cultural valuation of effective sleep management would have supported the disciplined approach to maritime sleep, evidenced in archaeological findings. Unlike cultures that celebrated sleep deprivation as evidence of dedication or zeal, Viking culture appears to have recognised the practical importance of adequate rest for effective function. Archaeological evidence from several Viking burial ships indicates that high-status individuals were sometimes buried with bedding materials and sleep-related items, suggesting that the ability to rest effectively was considered an important skill that would serve the deceased in the afterlife. This cultural context helps explain the apparent contradiction between the Vikings' fearsome reputation and their sophisticated approach to basic human needs like sleep. Rather than viewing rest as a weakness or luxury, Norse culture recognised it as an essential component of effective warrior performance. A remarkably modern perspective that gave them a significant advantage over contemporaries who lacked this pragmatic understanding. The archaeological record provides tangible evidence of how Vikings actually slept at sea, sometimes confirming and sometimes challenging the accounts found in literary sources. Several key archaeological discoveries have proven particularly illuminating. The Gokstad ship, discovered in 1880 in Norway, contained numerous items related to shipboard sleeping arrangements. Among these were fragments of woolen textiles and animal hair that likely formed part of bedding materials. The distribution of these fragments concentrated along the central axis of the ship and near the slightly raised platforms at bow and stern, confirming the sleeping patterns suggested in literary accounts. Particularly significant were wear patterns found on certain deck planks, areas showing smoother surfaces and subtle depressions consistent with regular human contact. These wear patterns were most pronounced in areas that would have been protected from direct rainfall, suggesting preferred sleeping locations during routine voyages. The Oseberg ship, discovered in 1904, contained an even richer array of sleep-related artefacts. These included wooden headrests, similar to those used in contemporary Asian cultures, suggesting that at least some high-status Vikings used specialised equipment to improve sleep quality. The ship also contained multiple down-filled cushions that could have served as pillows during voyages. More recent underwater archaeology has yielded evidence of sleep management during actual voyages rather than ceremonial burial ships. A Viking wreck discovered off the Danish coast in 1997 contained a concentration of personal items in specific areas of the ship, suggesting designated personal spaces that would have been used for sleeping as well as storage. Among the most telling archaeological finds are the numerous small personal items that would have been used during pre-sleep rituals. These include bone combs. Vikings were notably concerned with personal grooming, despite their fearsome reputation. Small vials that may have contained oils used to protect the skin from salt spray before sleep, and fire-starting kits that would have been used to light evening fires for warmth and cooking. Isotope analysis of preserved human remains from the Viking Age provides indirect evidence of sleep quality through stress markers. Comparative analysis of skeletal remains from coastal Viking communities who would have spent significant time at sea and inland settlements shows similar stress markers, suggesting that maritime Vikings maintained comparable overall health despite the challenges of shipboard living, an indication that they successfully managed critical needs like sleep. The archaeological record thus confirms the literary accounts of Viking maritime sleep, while adding nuance and detail to our understanding of how these remarkable seafarers maintained their effectiveness during extended voyages. The Vikings' approach to maritime sleep represents more than a historical curiosity. It established patterns that would influence seafaring cultures for centuries to come, and contains insights relevant to modern sleep science and operational planning. When medieval European powers began building naval forces in the 11th and 12th centuries, they initially adopted many aspects of Viking maritime practice, including their minimalist approach to sleeping accommodations. The earliest naval vessels of kingdoms like England and France featured open decks with crews sleeping in arrangements remarkably similar to those used by their Viking predecessors. Only gradually did European naval architecture evolve toward more specialised sleeping arrangements. By the 15th century, dedicated hammocks had become standard in many naval forces, but the basic principle established by the Vikings, that maritime sleep should prioritise vessel performance over individual comfort, remained influential until the modern era. More subtly, the Vikings' approach to managing sleep as an operational factor influenced military planning well beyond the maritime domain. Their recognition that well-rested warriors held a significant advantage over sleep-deprived defenders established a principle that would be rediscovered repeatedly by military theorists throughout history. Modern sleep science has validated many aspects of the Viking approach to maritime rest. Their practice of biphasic sleep, dividing rest into multiple periods, aligns with research suggesting this pattern may be more natural for humans than the consolidated 8-hour sleep period we now consider normal. Their recognition of the importance of protein consumption before sleep and their use of fermented foods containing natural compounds that promote rest anticipate modern nutritional approaches to sleep optimization. Perhaps most relevant to contemporary applications is the Vikings' integration of sleep management into their operational planning. Rather than treating rest as an afterthought, archaeological and literary evidence suggests they viewed sleep as a critical operational factor, a perspective that modern military and emergency services are increasingly adopting. The Viking approach to maritime sleep thus represents an early example of what we would now call human performance optimization, the systematic management of basic physiological needs to maintain peak effectiveness under challenging conditions. As our longship journey through Viking maritime sleep practices concludes, we return to our original question. How did these legendary warriors manage to maintain their ferocious reputation while contending with one of humanity's most basic needs? The answer lies not in any single innovation, but in the Vikings' holistic approach to the challenge of maritime sleep. By integrating physical adaptations, psychological techniques, nutritional strategies, and social organisation, they transformed what could have been a critical vulnerability into a source of advantage. Their willingness to accept discomfort, sleeping on hard decks, enduring cold and wet conditions, and maintaining function despite constant motion, reflected not a disregard for human needs, but a pragmatic prioritisation of operational effectiveness over individual comfort. This philosophy enabled the construction of vessels optimised for speed, manoeuvrability, and versatility rather than crew amenities. The sophisticated watch systems and sleep rotation patterns evidenced in archaeological findings and saga accounts reveal a culture that understood the critical importance of adequate rest for maintaining combat effectiveness. Rather than celebrating sleeplessness as a virtue, as many warrior cultures have done, Viking society recognised that well-managed sleep was essential for sustained performance. Perhaps most remarkably, the Vikings achieved all this without the benefit of modern sleep science or specialised equipment. Their solutions emerged through a process of cultural evolution, the accumulated wisdom of generations of seafarers who discovered through hard experience what worked and what didn't in the challenging environment of the North Atlantic. As we face our own contemporary challenges in managing sleep in operational environments, from military deployments to space exploration, the Viking example reminds us that effective solutions often combine technological innovation with cultural adaptation and psychological resilience. The image of the Viking warrior sleeping peacefully on an open deck amid the spray and motion of the North Sea stands as a testament to human adaptability and to the extraordinary maritime culture that dominated northern European waters for 3 centuries. Their mastery of maritime sleep was not merely a survival strategy, but a competitive advantage that helped transform a marginal Scandinavian population into one of history's most successful seafaring civilizations. In the words of the Havamal, the Vikings understood a truth that remains relevant in our own time. Cattle die, kindred die, every man is mortal, but the good name never dies of one who has done well. In mastering the fundamental challenge of sleep at sea, the Vikings did indeed do well, establishing a legacy of maritime accomplishment that continues to capture our imagination more than a millennium later.